One episode of Star Trek The Next Generation that often makes the list of the best episodes is Yesterday's Enterprise, and for good reason. It is a superbly crafted story about meaning, sacrifice, and belonging. On its surface, it looks like a lot of other time travel stories, but if you look closely, you'll see that this episode is about much more than alternate timelines and parallel worlds. So in this video, I want to highlight why this story stands out above many others in the time travel genre, and as we'll see, it really all comes down to one all-important creative decision. The episode actually begins on one of the funniest scenes in TNG, the famous scene in which Worf refers to prune juice as
warrior's drink.
It's actually my favorite Worf moment in the show, which is kind of ironic because the only reason he's in this opening scene is to highlight the absence of Worf in this episode. Now, as with all great Star Trek stories, it begins with a swirling blue anomaly appearing in space. Now, take a moment to just note the composition of the frame here because this will also come into play in the closing scene of this episode. Now, interestingly, Guinan has some kind of reaction to the anomaly, though it's not clear why. We cut to the bridge where the anomaly is being scanned, but Data can't really get a solid reading from it. It seems to be there and not be there at the same time. It's something like a wormhole, but also something like a time displacement. In any case, it's unstable and could collapse at any moment. Before they know it, a ship has emerged through the rift, and at that moment, something changes. This is communicated to maximum dramatic effect with this shot of Picard in the foreground speaking to Worf in the background. After the ship appears, the same shot is recreated, but Worf has been replaced by the character Tasha Yar. This is called a match frame, two identical shot compositions. And I just want to point out what excellent scriptwriting and directing this is. It clearly emphasizes that an important change has occurred by revealing that one character has been replaced by another. Now, Tasha Yar was a main character in the first season of TNG until her character was killed off rather unceremoniously, and that detail actually does matter a lot in this episode. She was head of security before Worf's promotion, so it makes sense that she would be standing at his station. But it does raise the question, why isn't Worf on the bridge of the Enterprise? Now, interestingly, we cut back to Guinan in 10 Forward, and it's revealed that the Enterprise has changed in other ways. There are some clues that the crew is more military than explorer. They're all carrying phasers with this cool over-the-shoulder strap. And the opening scene concludes with the revelation that the mystery ship's registry number is NCC 1701-C. It's the previous Enterprise. So it's just impossible to not be hooked by this intro. Now, if you're wondering about the lore of the Enterprise C, nothing had actually been established in Star Trek canon about the ship at this point. There was the original Enterprise from the original series, which was refitted for the movie Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, and called Enterprise A. So the ships B and C were implied to exist, but neither had been shown on screen until this point. The Enterprise B was eventually shown in the movie Star Trek Generations 4 years later. So the Enterprise C was a blank slate and a natural fit for this episode. And one thing you might notice about this episode is that it is lit completely differently. The ship is dark, and it's not even subtle, especially compared to the brightly lit Enterprise that we're used to. It's like the lights are just completely switched off in every room on the ship, maybe as part of some wartime austerity measure. This is, of course, to distinguish this Enterprise from the one we're used to, but the dramatic lighting also gives this episode a very different atmosphere. The characters are less friendly with one another. They don't have meetings, they have briefings in which Picard gives orders rather than taking suggestions. By the way, one thing I think TNG always does really well is using production design to depict alternate realities in a believable way. It's really the little details that make the difference. This extra battle station behind the helm, this tactical map. There's just enough unique set design in this episode to make the Enterprise feel like a different place while still feeling familiar. Now, we learn pretty quickly that in this timeline, the Federation is still at war with the Klingon Empire, which explains why Worf is not present and why this Enterprise D looks like a battleship. And it turns out that the Enterprise C was nearly destroyed in battle before it was plucked from its timeline 22 years in the past. Had it remained, it would have rescued a Klingon outpost from a Romulan attack, and in so doing, earned the respect of the Klingons, thus averting decades of war. Of course, the only way they figure this out is because Guinan has the intuition that something is not right. She tells Picard,
"This is not a ship of war. This is a ship of peace."
and so the central dramatic question is revealed. Should the Enterprise C return to its own time in the hope of restoring the timeline in which the war has already ended? Now, there's a lot to unpack in the morality of that question. The Enterprise C has 125 surviving crew members, including her captain and a helmsman who develops a budding romance with Tasha Yar. And on the one hand, sending them back through the anomaly would mean certain death, with no guarantee that Guinan's instinct is correct or that it would achieve the desired outcome. But on the other hand, it's revealed that the war with the Klingons has destroyed over half of the Federation and killed over 40 billion people. Not only that, Picard reveals that the Federation will likely lose the war within the next 6 months, so the stakes of this decision are pretty high. It's the classic moral dilemma of the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few. But the more you think about it, the more you realize just how morally complex this whole situation really is. Because, after all, if the Enterprise C succeeds and the original timeline is restored, this new timeline will also cease to exist. So the question of precisely who is sacrificing what is not so cut and dry. It kind of raises the question, if an entire timeline simply ceases to exist, then did the people on that timeline sacrifice their lives? Bit of a noodle scratcher. And of course, all of this is illustrated by the inner conflict and moral actions of the episode's main character, Tasha Yar, because Guinan's intuition also senses something wrong about her. In fact, she even tells Tasha directly that in the other timeline she's already dead. Not only that, she died an empty death. Now, Guinan is actually a really interesting character in TNG. I'm going to make a whole video about her soon, so get subscribed. But for now, the thing to know about her is that she is the archetype of the Oracle. What that means is that she perceives the world differently, perhaps in a way that is suspended above the natural order in some way. Her senses are never explained because, in principle, they can't be. So yes, canonically, she's an Elorian, a species known to have some special perception of time, but what matters for our purposes is that she sees beyond what the other characters see, and she informs their moral decisions without directly guiding them. So when Tasha discovers the truth from her, she asks Picard to transfer to the Enterprise C so that at least her death will have meaning. She also says she doesn't belong in this timeline, which I find really interesting. In fact, this is probably the most thought-provoking thing about this episode, the idea that the timeline they're in is somehow objectively wrong. Towards the conclusion of this episode, the Klingons show up and attack both ships. It's a losing battle, and they're now fully committed to getting the Enterprise C back to her own time. Everyone involved is making a sacrifice, because if they succeed, everyone on the Enterprise C will die, and everyone on the Enterprise D will cease to have ever existed. So in order to give the viewer some sense of moral resolution here, there needs to be at least some impression that the events of the story and the sacrifices made by its characters actually had consequences. And that is the most important creative choice made in the writing of this episode. It's the idea to use the character Guinan as an anchor to the original timeline, because without that, this story really wouldn't work. Without some way to convey that the original timeline is objectively the correct one, then there would be nothing to restore, nobody to save, and no meaning in the sacrifice of its characters. And so when the Enterprise C enters the anomaly and the timeline is restored, it's clear that Guinan remembers what happened, even if it's only in her unique way. It doesn't even matter that the other characters don't remember it, because her memory is enough for us, the viewers, to know that it wasn't just a dream. And this is just beautifully capped off in the very last shot, which is another match frame of that opening shot with Worf, bringing us back to where we started. And because the episode has been so perfectly written, there's a perfect line of dialogue to end on.
Jordy, tell me about Tasha Yar.
This confirms beyond a doubt that the story we just watched did happen, and the sacrifices of its characters had moral consequences. Tasha Yar got the character resolution that she deserved, and no one will ever know it except Guinan and you, the viewer. Just another great example of the genius and wisdom of Star Trek: The Next Generation. So thanks for watching. Check out my Patreon if you'd like to support this channel, and I'll see you on the next one.